Hey, it's Soul, here to hang out and bring up another sort of armchair design video while we wait for more Dragonflight news. So welcome back if you're returning, and if you're new, I hope you enjoy yourself. You can help support the channel by liking the video and subscribing and hitting the bell notification thing. So today I want to talk about how World of Warcraft is returning to a time before this so-called borrowed power. It's been a long time since World of Warcraft Legion though, so while for many players it's a step in the right direction, for others it's going to feel like new territory, and maybe it's going to make them feel a little bit uncomfortable. At the center of this discussion is the upcoming talent system, which I've been praising since its announcement, and I've been pretty satisfied with it after seeing the Druid and the Death Knight talent trees so far. Here's the question though, is there a catch? Is there a dark side to what otherwise seems like a good change? I'm going to set up a narrative, alright? But this video is not meant to get you scared or worried or angry about anything, just to kind of think over what I have to say, because this might be sort of big. Let's take a quick glance at the sort of distant past, or maybe just over to WoW Classic. That's not so bad either. WoW Classic endgame has a feel that Dragonflight intends to try to capture or emulate, and that is the feeling of deep player customization without too many of those auxiliary systems to grind, the borrowed power. In the classic days, players leveled up and they got a bunch of talents as they went along. And then at max level, players progressed into endgame by supplementing their class and talent choices with starting gear from quests and rares and low-level dungeons that provided, the stats or the secondary stats to create a sort of synergy. The incremental gear gains let them break into tougher and tougher content where they could earn those coveted epics. Gems and enchants helped to supplement that along the way. Trinkets and set bonuses help to secure that certain special build, that bit of gameplay change that made your character feel good, or at least it would feel good being on top of them recount meters, right? With the Legion and Battle for Azeroth and Shadowlands expansions came this era where there are far fewer customizable talents while leveling, and this was supposed to spread into these, again, auxiliary systems with a separate form of progression. Gear almost felt like an afterthought because it came from many sources that we happened to farm, well, outside of Titan Forging and all that, but we were really grinding for that artifact power. And then came the more selective gearing, the gems and enchants and set bonuses and trinkets as mentioned before. The awkwardness of borrowed power was especially felt at the end of Legion and Battle for Azeroth and maybe Shadowlands, when our characters, ready to level in the following expansion, lost many of these abilities and perks, giving us that feeling of our characters not growing between expansions. Folks and notably critics ran with this narrative that the game was redesigned with this really thick period of max level progression before we could really enjoy our gameplay, and it was a scheme to increase time played and please the stakeholders and investors and Bobby Kotick with these fancy business numbers. For us, the players, in practice that meant having a reason to, maybe feeling pressured or forced to log in for these incremental gains. The response from over the past 6 or so years has obviously been mixed. Over this period, the developers have had to respond to the likes of the artifact grind and other criticism with artifact knowledge. They had to make essences easier to farm for by making their requirements account-wide. There's renown skips and account-wide recipes for legendary gear. There's account-wide progress for soul binds, and notably regular gear catch-ups for returnees and new players and alts, so they can jump into these many other grinds with ease, okay? Cynics would say that this was an era of the WoW team creating its own problems, followed by creating solutions that wouldn't be necessary if they didn't create these problems in the first place. And finally, after many moons, the WoW team is ready to move on from borrowed power as we know it, and is putting this work back into talents. In an effort to help ease people into these changes, I've been mentioning this a lot because it will alter player behavior very significantly, in my opinion. I mean, imagine merely hitting max level is sort of like getting all the conduits and soul binds and legendaries all fully available to play with to tweak your character the way you like, and you're still wearing greens. All that's left now is getting gear, planning your secondaries, completing set bonuses, and getting awesome trinkets. That's kind of it. Which leads me to also ask, that's it? I want to make it very clear that I'm not trying to identify a problem that all players are going to share, but I feel very strongly that there are going to be players out there who feel a sort of culture shock depending on what the WoW team does with their design at endgame. I mean, I myself might be lumped into this crowd. I might be unsure of how I'm going to feel once I am at max level, and I ask myself, oh, is endgame going to be that accessible? And I think that in some ways the WoW team does not intend for it to be that accessible. So let me explain. Based on what we know about Dragonflight, which is very little, at max level, I'm gonna continue on with training my dragon riding, you know, the super gliding through the sky. As I hit various milestones, that progress will be shared account-wide, meaning that for alts, once they're able to, whichever breakpoint that is, they'll be able to enjoy whatever dragon riding skill our mains have earned. Again, there's not a lot that's been announced. We don't know if the 4 starting reputations of Dragonflight are going to be like mega reputations that bring the scale and support of the 4 Shadowlands covenants by comparison. With those came like deep collection paths and extra activities for players to enjoy outside of what I call the big 3, organized raiding, dungeons, and PvP. We do know that there's going to be a big overhaul of the crafting and profession system, which, based on developer statements, sounds like a very deep and involved feature that will provide ample opportunities for gear. But in my observation, as an armchair developer who really doesn't know any better, I think there's some fat that's going to be trimmed in Dragonflight that today, in this borrowed para era, we take for granted. And by that I mean easy epics. I mean, think about it. We've gotten easy epics from the likes of mission tables, and world quests, and dailies, and emissaries or covenant callings, and assault objectives, and more, and particularly catch-up gear from the likes of Korthia and Zereth Mortis, all for the sake of gearing our alts and new characters faster to get them up to speed, which is bound to feel different in Dragonflight with what we're dealing with. These aren't necessarily bad things, alright? But I'm framing these gear sources as trimming fat, not exactly chopping off legs. I hope you get the references there. But I feel like this is unnecessary in Dragonflight. I feel like that because despite borrowed power, the incremental gains of conduit levels and artifact levels and the farming of ash and cinders and more, there still had to be that feeling of obtaining gear while grinding away at these particular activities. You might have noticed that normal dungeons and the daily heroic are still around, okay, but they tend to not be as premier as they were in the old days, unless you were looking for some quick artifact power or that legendary memory that only drops from that one dungeon. But in Dragonflight, I have a very different vision of early gearing from the start of the expansion to the beginning of a fresh new season. In so few words, the feel of early gearing could slow down considerably, or at least it'll start very slow, before feeling a bit more like what we're used to today, with the rounds of mythic pluses, raiding, killing world bosses, weekly events, and more. So again, a slow start before we reach a certain velocity, and then it's going to feel normal again. I mostly see a compensation of what's being trimmed away. So at the start of Dragonflight, the game is going to rely on good old reputation vendors and perhaps main story content to provide some ample starting gear for endgame. This sounds very familiar. We experienced this in Shadowlands. The loop of running regular dungeons to heroics, including the daily heroic to mythics, I think it's going to play a more regular part because the likes of World Quest and Daily Quest content are less likely to provide these fast gear rewards because there's no other borrowed power stuff to accompany it. Now, those might be reserved for the new renown-like reputation that I'd really like to learn more about because that's what non-Big 3 players are going to be very interested in learning more on. Perhaps the endgame loop will be Big 3 content for Big 3 players almost exclusively, while solo and world content players are going to continue the rounds of dailies and such because, I don't know, some sort of MacGuffin currency like Anima is going to let them upgrade their specialized outdoor gear sets. You know, think Zereth Mortis gearing, but maybe a little bit slower and different in who knows how many ways. This philosophy may feel even more apparent after the start of a new season. It's like, imagine Shadowlands without the Korthia gear, which was eventually very easy to obtain, or the gear catch-ups in Zereth Mortis, which went for a measly 500 anima per piece. It's been true that players follow the path of least resistance, including not playing the game. Sick burn, I know. But you know what would make a sudden comeback? Running raid finders from the previous season, which is still a thing today, but I think in Dragonflight it could be even more of a thing. So I don't have strong opinions on this topic, mostly because I'm speculating based on almost nothing, so I don't encourage you to get too worked up one way or another either. But I would like you to think this over with me and consider the design of early endgame. Like, will the velocity of gearing change in Dragonflight? Without the extra time spent farming to develop our borrowed powers, does that mean that time should be shifted back to more traditional farms? Or should that time just not be made up for at all? And either way, would that be good for you? Now, I know this was kind of a weird topic to take on, but I thought it would make for some interesting conversation, so I invite you over to the comments to share your takes. Again, please like the video and subscribe to support conversations like these and whatever else I come up with, and I wish you a pleasant rest of your day. Until next time, folks, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.